Hi, today we talk about scriptable objects. These are very interesting things, and they are similar to components, okay? But as you know, components are C# scripts, C# classes that derive from MonoBehaviour. And then I can, like actions, I can drag and drop it onto a game object, and then when I click on it, I see appear here as a component, okay? But this one, spawn manager scriptable objects, it doesn't derive from MonoBehaviour. Let me show you. As you can see, it is a C# class like the others, but it derives from scriptable objects. So that means that even if it compiles, I cannot drag and drop it onto a avatar, for instance, or anything for that matter. See, it gives me error. It says, oh, you can't do that, right? So see, it's not there. So what are they for? Well, again, like the other scripts that are classes that derive from MonoBehaviour, I place them in the scripts folder in the project tab. No difference. So they are all together. Now, I could also decide to have them separated. It's up to you, but they are. It's code, so I put them in scripts personally. But then they need to be instantiated. So what does it mean for a component to be instantiated? Basically, when we drag and drop it onto a game object, that's when we instantiate it, and then we see the instance in the inspector, right? So for instance, we see that there is a box collider component here because it was drag and dropped or added programmatically there, and now when I click on the game object, I can see it in the inspector. But I can do that with scriptable objects. Still, I can instantiate them still, right? But typically that happens with a menu. So for instance, I go in another folder called SOs, scriptable objects, and I right click and I say create scriptable objects, and then there is this one, spawn manager script, right? And it is identical to the one I called bad guy location, so I don't do this one, okay? I already have it. So this is an instance. As you can see, the script has this icon with the pound sign because it's a C#, right? So pound is also pronounced sharp. Okay, so we get the joke. Whereas this one is an instance, and it is remarkably different. The icon is unlike any other icon. Scriptable objects have their own icon, okay? Still, just because they cannot be in the scene or in the hierarchy doesn't mean when you click on them, they don't appear in the inspector. They do. And pretty much they look a lot like a component. It just is not inside the game object, okay? So for instance, if you remember, we had what? A string, prefab name, an integer, and an array of vector trees, right? So let's go back here. So we have the string, I call it bad guy, singular, okay? The number of prefabs to create, I say 6, and then for each one I specify XYZ, right? There is a vector tree array, and so I did plus, plus, and I created all the ones I wanted. So these are the 6. And basically, when I press play, just to give an idea, right? Bad guys, they get instantiated around in these positions, all right? So they are surrounding the avatar, okay? So what if I wanted to do maybe put some, I don't know, trees in this level, right? Well, I could have another object called spawner of trees, and still it would have a spawner, right? It would have a spawner component that refers a prefab, not the big guys that are just spheres, but red spheres, they would be trees, and then it would have a reference to a similar, like equivalent to this one. Like I can make a copy, right? Instead of using the other one, instead of bad guy, I would call it tree. Instead of 4, 6, maybe I have only 4, and I specify positions that are completely different. I don't know, 2, 2, 2, 2, and 2, right? Different ones, and of course, I would have also to have a spawner, so let's call it spawner of trees. I don't have a prefab for trees, but hey, let's make one. Let's make up that we have create. Actually, let's make it from here directly. 3D. Let's say a capsule is a tree. Okay. So by drag and drop it onto the project tab, you see it becomes blue because it's an instance of a prefab now. I have my prefab here. So I want to place it at 0.5. And then, actually, let's make it 0, 0 everywhere. Anyway, I'm setting the position, right? So that's what it is for, by the way. And maybe I would create also material, sure, one for the trees. Guess what? Very original, I make it green. Let's see, a green tree, okay. And then I go to the prefab. So let's put the tree back so that I can click on the material and put this on it. Now, because I changed the instance without changing the prefab, I say override it and I apply it. So now, again, the prefab now has it. Because whatever change I put in the instance now is applied to the prefab. So if I go here, I see that as a green material. All right? So all I need is to tell the spawner of trees that the prefab I want to make 4 copies of is this, and that the SO is this one. Instead of embed guy locations, it will be, probably I call it 3 locations, right? And there's only 4, I call it 3, so that then it will become 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4 probably. And maybe instead of 4, let's put it more to the outside. So 5, 5, 5, 5, and 5. Okay, so I press play. And they appear exactly on top of that. Oh, I see. It's because I still have the bad guy location set in the tree location. So that's why the trees were exactly on top of the bad guy. So now they are more outside, okay? See, somewhat more outside because 5 is, greater than 3, so they are a little off. See, it works. And this way, I can spawn objects of different prefabs multiple times wherever I want. So let's see how this works in practice. As I said, scriptable objects cannot be instantiated by just drag and drop the corresponding script onto a game object. So usually they're instantiated via a menu. So there is this property that I can say file name by default, if I instantiate one, call it data, and this is the submenu under create. Create this one for scriptable objects. Probably all my scriptable objects will be here first, right? And then this will be different, right? So I'm creating this convention that if I tomorrow create another scriptable object class to do something completely different, probably the first submenu will be still called scriptable objects, and then this one will be called whatever it needs to be called. For instance, the name, in this case I used exactly the name of the class. It could be different, right? And then I specify a prefab name, how many I want, and their positions. And here, instead, is an actual component, right? This is the one that goes on the spawner game object that is in the hierarchy. Like in this case, I have 2. This one has a spawner. It's called spawner of bad boys, and this is spawner of trees. Actually, of bad guys, right? Of boys, bad guys. and has a spawner component that says which prefab to instantiate, in this case this one, the bad guy one, and how many, using and where, using the bad guy location scriptable object, and the spawner of trees says, well, this is the prefab I want to instantiate 4 times, and I know that it is 4 times and where they are because we are using this, right? And notice when I press play, see the name is tree, right, the string, and it says tree 1, 2, 3, 4, and bad guy is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? See, notice that I don't have to do it manually, and then don't have to go and say 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's very repetitive. So with this technique, basically, we are distilling it down to a science, what is it that we want to achieve, and we sort of automate it as much as possible for the level designers, right? Because we, as tech people, right, engineers, we are the ones that work not only to make the life easier to, those that make the levels, and they decide, which weapon for each monster and how much energy they have. But in general, we write a lot of code to support these same people, right? Because when they try to do their work, their job, they rather not be exposed to much code, right? I mean, they have to know a little bit what to drag and drop here and there. But for instance, in this case, we could tell them, well, create an empty game object and call it spawner of whatever you want, put this component on it, link it to here, to that scriptable object that contains when, how many, and where, and this is the link, the reference to the actual prefab they want to instantiate so many times. And here, in start, it calls this function. And there's a for loop that goes through all the ones we want to create. For instance, the bad guys is 6. Okay, so this is 6. And then instantiates it 6 times, right, because the for loop. And notice that the second field of the instantiate is the position. And of course, you use the spawn points, it's a vector tree. For the rotation, says just identity, so it doesn't care. And that is like neutral rotation, basically 0, 0, 0. And then he says, oh, but by the way, the name is whatever string you specified, right, this one, plus the number that we are keeping track of, right? So it's 1 the first time, and then say plus plus, so bad guy 1, bad guy 2, bad guy 3, or 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3. That's why the name has these numbers already appended. And then here it calculates the next one. So the reason why it does this is because the number that you want to specify, you want to instantiate, doesn't necessarily match the number of positions. In a sense, you could put more than 1 in the same position, for instance, because they have different rotation, right? So they would still be visible even though they would be overlapping. In our case, we didn't, right? We said, if you remember, we said 4 for the trees, and we said, okay, 4 for the trees, and we actually specified 4 positions, and we said 6 for the bad guys, and we actually specified the 6th position because it seemed to make sense. And that's it. So what is this scriptable object, right? How do I make it? Well, I told you with a menu. Right-click, create scriptable object, and then this one. Now, this could be yet something else. For instance, it could be rocks, right? I want a location, rock locations. I want to place some rocks. I say, so I call it rock. How many do I want? Well, maybe I want 10. Well, no, let's not make so many, 2. And so let's say we specify them here. So maybe they would be like 7, 7, minus 7, minus 7. Of course, we want them above the ground, so 0, 5. And then, of course, we want a spawner. We can call it spawner of rocks. And so we need a prefab. Let's say the tree one, we call it rock. Of course, we don't want to use the same material that we use for the tree, so we duplicate that one too. We say rock, and we make them gray. And now I go here, I instantiate one just temporarily, just so that I can go in the material and drag and drop it onto it, so that it becomes gray. Then because the prefab is still the copy of the tree, so it's still green, right? So even though this one is gray. So how basically I modify the instance of the prefab. So what do? I want the prefab to be like that, so I apply the differences, and now at this point I can delete it. So now when I go to the rock, I see that it's gray. Okay. All right. What else do I need to do? Well, rocks, they're still called tree, so let's put the rock prefab, and instead of the tree locations, let's put the rock locations. Did you specify them? Yeah. Okay. So let's see what happens. All right. One here, 7, 7. The other here, -7, -7. We could expect them to be on the diagonal. Let's say I want to have them in the 4 corners, like as if it were like a ring or something. Well, I can just go here, right, and add a couple more. So 7, 7, -7, -7, but also 7, -7, and -7, 7. So all 4 corners, and let's say 4. Press, and now they should appear in the 4 corners. See? This is just one of possibly infinite examples of how you can use scriptable objects, meaning their instances of, right? In the end, as you can see, we always end up doing what? Instantiating them inside a component, so something that derives from MonoBehaviour, and here you go, this is the instance of the scriptable object, so that it knows, see, where to get the data, like how to get the number of, how to get the name, how to get the positions. Of course, the actual component needs to have a reference to that. But the advantage is that instead of actually, having the actual data here, because we know it's going to be the same again, right? So we sort of compact them all in one, and we can take this way advantage of another property of scriptable objects. You know how components during runtime, when we press play, we can modify their values, and but then when we press stop, we lose everything. That's actually not true for scriptable objects, because remember, they don't live in the hierarchy or the system, they live in the project. The project is like our hard drive, so it's like storage, right? So for instance, let me give you like the rocks, like they are in the 4 corners, right? But what if I decide that this one I want it to have in a slightly different place, right? Maybe I want to have it in, I don't know, -5, because I see that, let me see. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go here. Okay. Let's say this one. I want to rock number 4, the last one. I'm experimenting placing it here, right? And I see that, okay, maybe X is 5 and 5. Okay. Okay, so, well, in this case it doesn't really work because it's not constantly reloading it. But let me show you what I mean. If I press play, now I know that the last one has to be in 5, 5, right? I modify it. -5, 5. I stop. Still there. You see? These don't change because they are on the hard drive, right? You save them. Even if you turn off Unity, you shut down the machine, you reboot on the hard drive, it's not lost, right? Just because you are not playing. So this is also a way to sort of solidify certain aspects of a level, right? And this is like a tool that we give to level designers to say, look, this is actually data that is just more focused in a sense. And then, of course, you have to teach them how to use them, but it doesn't take too much to create these spawners, right? I mean, I have created a couple in front of you, already had one, right? You just have to set up a couple of things. And then you click on them and, you edit them. You can even edit them at runtime. And then you press stop, the values are still there. Now, this is a bit of a simplified version because we could even make them that when you modify them, automatically is reflected in the game. That would be even better, right? But for now, right, this is just a taste of scriptable objects. Are things that even after you instantiate them, they are still in the project. So their source code is in scripts in the project, and their instance is still in the project. They never really go directly into the hierarchy or the scene, but they can be placed inside as data, in a sense, as compressed data, 3 fields for 1, right? So there is only 1 field here that I see, but actually, when I click here, I see there's like 1, 2, 3, and this one is actually an array. And there is this reusability, and it becomes really handy for level designers because, first of all, they are not tricked by the fact that when you press stop, they lose everything and things like that. And it creates a system, so to say, right? And now you can create nearly infinite systems. This is to place objects on the level. You could have one that has, I don't know, the maximum energy and the current energy of a weapon, right? Maybe a counter for how many bullets it has. And then you create different kinds of weapons, and each one has an instance of that sort of scriptable object that works like the profile of a weapon, right? So that you decide every weapon, what are the characteristics, how many bullets, how fast it shoots, how long is the delay between a bullet and the next, how many bullets can you have in the same magazine before you need to change it, and so how powerful it is, and things like that. So they become like properties that are in general, for instance, of the ray gun. Now, a ray gun, maybe you have 10 in the game. Sometimes you find one, you use it, and then it discharges, and then you throw it away. But they all share the same sort of DNA, right? Their DNA is the scriptable object. You'll see that once we start using them, they become like second nature. You will immediately know, or you become good at knowing, oh, this should be probably a scriptable object. Oftentimes you start with a component, and then you realize some of the fields I can extract them, because you realize that you start making components, they look awfully similar, right? Imagine I have a component for a regular gun, one for a rifle, and one for something else. They all have number of bullets, and how powerful is that bullet, how often can I shoot them. Then suddenly I realize, hey, these fields are a scriptable object because they're like the profile of any weapon. And then I can just create several, I instantiate them, one for each weapon, and they become like the profiles, okay? I know this is a lot, but at the same time, there's nothing like starting using them to really learn. So don't be afraid. If something is not clear, you can also watch it again. But most importantly, try to start using them. That's how you learn how to make use of them, and you understand why they are so precious. Again, these are great because oftentimes we, the engineers, don't just directly make the levels. We make the tools that the level designers use to make the levels. Okay? So Scriptable Objects is just one of the pieces of the puzzle that we can use to make a tool that is less data intensive, so to say, for a level designer to use. All right?